It is blasphemy to compare a medium format camera's features and speed to that of a full-frame camera. You'll simply be told that medium format cameras are slow because that's the price you pay for image quality and resolution. The region beta paradox refers to how a situation has to become bad enough before someone will do something about it. This new GFX100 Mark II hasn't become bad, but the trouble with it is it has become better. So much so that it has crossed the threshold of being good enough before someone starts judging them against full frames. Make no mistake, we are looking at Fujifilm's true top of the line, the flagship model from their flagship series. It's an ambitious camera, extremely capable, but when it's gone ahead and set this bar for itself to be seen as more than just a slow medium format stills camera, it's hard to not go oof at a few things. To be completely fair, I think this camera over-delivers in the stills department. It's unreal to be able to fire shots off a medium format camera this effortlessly. It's the video features, the path less taken by medium formats, which makes you go, almost had it. But let's at least take a moment to admire the new hardware. This is a brand new chassis after all, which is a very rare sight indeed for new cameras these days. The vertical grip is no longer integrated, which means the camera has a smaller footprint. I thought Fuji was being sneaky by selling the grips separately so they can make more profit. But turns out they are selling the Mark II at a significantly lower price than the Mark I, so I was wrong about that. In terms of I/Os, we've finally got a full-sized HDMI, as well as an RJ45 port, which its predecessor was missing. I almost pissed myself thinking they had omitted the headphone jack despite all these new video-centric features, but turns out they just moved it over to the grip side, so we are all good. The main styling element this time is this upward slant on the top plate, very different layout as well, bigger top LCD, more custom buttons, as well as a more up-to-date dial plus toggle design. If you look closely at the texture of the grip, it kind of looks like the motif you'll find on the grille of a Mercedes-Benz. But this EVF is incredible. The magnification is massive. It's one of those 9.44 million dot OLED EVFs, and sometimes if the image is too big to see the edges, you can toggle the display to have a smaller image and have the info text go around it. It's still detachable and compatible with the tilt adapter, just don't expect the colors to match or the whole thing looking pretty in general. The screen can tilt or flip out towards the right for hip shooting. You'll realize it can pull back a lot farther than usual, and the reason for that is to accommodate the Fan 001 accessory. Look, I'm glad the option is there, but this is a monstrosity. It's, very awkward is what it is. That being said, with an ambient temperature of 25 degrees Celsius, Fuji is claiming, with the fan, unlimited 4K 60p recording and 137 minutes specifically of 8K recording. Yes, this does 8K, but we'll get to video in just a bit. Let's talk about stills. Without the ability to look at RAW files, I can't speak definitively about the image quality of this camera in stills. What we do know is this has been fitted with a newer, better Generation 2 sensor despite having exactly the same resolution as the GFX100. What is for sure though is a new film simulation shipping with the GFX100 Mark II, and it's called Reala Ace. It's actually one of Fuji's film stocks, which was discontinued a little over a decade ago, and this is its comeback in digital form. It's described as having faithful colors with a heart tonality, and it's a very accommodating look. You can fire this off at 8 frames per second. The shutter dampening does feel like it's taken a step back from the 100, but being this much snappier, I think it's not too bad. To keep up with that immense amount of data and that speed, the dual media slots now use an SD plus CF Express Type B configuration. The AF algorithm uses the same advanced subject detection we first saw with the XH2S, which means for a medium format, the autofocus is surreal even when it comes to tracking moving subjects. Depending on the lens you pair it with, the IBIS can also deliver up to 8 stops of compensation, and I can say the IBIS on this is one of the best I've used across any camera. On this 55mm lens, I was quite easily and effortlessly getting sharp handheld shots at 1/8 second shutter speeds on a 100 megapixel sensor. Pairing it with this new 55 f1.7 that came out together with this camera, it's really hard to not have an absolute blast. Taking photos with this camera is an extremely rewarding process. This coveted large format look is perhaps the single biggest appeal of being able to shoot video on a sensor this big. You're now looking through the full width of the sensor, 55mm at f1.7. Alas, not many modes on this camera allow you to take advantage of its big sensor in video. And that brings me to the annoying mishmash of resolutions, frame rates, and crop factors on this camera. Here's a still image from this camera representing the full sensor area. You can shoot in 4K UHD or DCI up to 60p using the full width of the sensor. 8K video can be recorded up to 30p with a 1.51 crop in 16:9 or with a 1.42 crop in the DCI aspect ratio, but DCI is limited to 24 frames per second. That unfortunately means that shooting 8K on this nullifies all medium format benefits. It's actually an image area smaller than 35mm full frame. There are, however, anamorphic modes which shoot in the 1.38:1 aspect ratio, which is very close to 4:3, at a 1.24 crop, which is roughly full frame. These anamorphic modes are only available in 23.98p or true 24p. In 4K anamorphic, it records the full tall image with an option to preview it with a D-squeeze. In 8K, however, it's the same 1.24 crop, but the D-squeeze can only be baked into the image at a D-squeeze factor of 2, giving you a resulting image with an aspect ratio of 2.76:1. If that was a lot to take in, I've also omitted the two 4.8K modes, 5.4K and 5.8K modes, for simplicity. Bottom line is, it still isn't possible to do true open-gate full sensor video on the GFX100 Mark II. The closest you'll get is 4K up to 60p, which uses the full width of the sensor, but not the full height. It's very neat that Fuji's accommodating anamorphic shooting with this, but it essentially maxes out at full frame for anamorphic use cases. Now, to be fair, anamorphic lenses with an image circle big enough to cover this full sensor are far and few. You also can't help but feel that Fuji's milked the X Processor 5 to its very limits with this camera. You'll come across instances when the UI can't really keep up with the speed of your inputs, but it's exactly instances like these when I feel like I'm judging a medium format camera by full frame standards. And that's not to say that it hasn't made significant strides. At last, we have touch tracking autofocus on a medium format Fuji, which works in video. They've also added in a waveform monitor, which is way more useful than just a histogram. Also, internal ProRes recording, just like the XH2s. You can see they're very much trying to go the cinema camera route with this, but I'd say what's holding it back to the hybrid category is the software and the hardware. The image, though, is remarkable. This gets F-Log 2 now, which alone gives this 13 plus stops of dynamic range. There's a dynamic range optimizer toggle, which when activated gives you one extra stop of dynamic range at the expense of slightly more rolling shutter. It still is an improvement over the GFX100's 30 millisecond rating thanks to the newer, faster sensor. But what I really appreciate about this is the choice. You get to decide, depending on the situation, readout speed over dynamic range, or vice versa. The GFX100 Mark II is not a bad camera by any means. It is a beast of a machine. But when it's gotten this good, you're kind of hoping for it to be perfect. Though at $7,499, this is launching for $2,500 less than its predecessor. It's very hard to fault a better camera that costs less. Every time I feel there's a compromise on this camera, I just tell myself that it's got a huge sensor and 102 million pixels to process.